You know, if you're a victim and you can ascribe moral superiority to yourself, then you're justified in the use of force. And I did a paper with a student of mine who toured the mass graves in Eastern Europe and Yugoslavia with the UN, and we looked at the precursors to genocide, and one of them was an enhanced sense of victimization. That allows you to lash out at the hypothetical perpetrators before they do anything, because you're being victimized. You saw the same thing to some degree in Nazi Germany.
Yeah, Hitler. Hitler felt very victimized.
Yeah, Hitler claimed that the Jews were victimizing Germany, essentially. And so once you're a victim and you have all the moral status that goes along with being a victim, then you can't do any wrong, essentially. Right. So.
Remember that Drexel professor who wanted white genocide for Christmas? I hate even saying that. Well, he's back, and he's now blaming whiteness for the Texas church shooting. Take a listen.
University newspaper piece tells white students your DNA is an abomination. Rudy Martinez, the writer, begins, when I think of all the white people I've ever encountered, there's perhaps only a dozen I would consider decent.
Terrible.
Wonder if one of them is Lou Dobbs. Now, if you think that's a little mean, try the ending of the piece. Rudy writes, whiteness will be over because we want it to be. And when it dies, there will be millions of cultural zombies aimlessly wandering across a vastly changed landscape. Ontologically speaking, white death will mean liberation for all. Until then, remember this. I hate you because you shouldn't exist. You are both the dominant apparatus on the planet and the void in which all other cultures, upon meeting you, die. D.C. during Trump's inauguration and tried to crowdfund for legal fees. That's not surprising. That figures. What's surprising is that in an era of safe spaces where students get out of classes or ban speeches because of diverse opinions and words, a college paper in Texas can run this savage call to violence. And as Hollywood creates movies and TV shows that push the myth that America is a sexist, racist tyranny, a college paper would happily run a piece that essentially calls for genocide. But I guess if the color's white, mass murder is okay.
Minorities can't be racist. The only people that can be racist are people with power. I disagree. Anybody can believe another race is inferior or superior. That doesn't matter to me. This was basically calling for racial extermination. If you had reversed white and black, this would never have been published. I agree there are advantages to being white in this country. The criminal justice system, socially or in corporate America, I get that. I'm not acutely aware of it because I am white, but I agree that it exists. There's also advantages to being handsome or attractive or rich or well-educated. We can talk about that. I think class is a bigger determination of success in this country than race. And if you ask people in Appalachia if they're getting a lot of benefits from their white skin, I don't know if they'd all agree with that.
You know, within that weird...
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. We want to tell you about an op-ed that ran in the New York Times over the weekend you might not have seen. The writer is a law professor in New York called Echo Yonka, asked a simple question. Can my children be friends with white people? He really asked it, and he wasn't optimistic. Quote, I will teach my boys the lesson generations old, he wrote. I will teach them to be cautious. I will teach them suspicion. I will teach them distrust. I will teach my boys to have profound doubts that friendship with white people is possible. Well, those doubts mirrored the writer's own. As he put it, quote, history has provided little reason for people of color to trust white people. That piece was one of the most popular on the New York Times website, even today. It was hardly unusual, though. Go to any liberal website, Salon, Slate, Vox, HuffPo, and you'll find similar pieces arguing that an entire racial group is untrustworthy and dangerous. This is a big change for the left. For most of the 20th century, liberals, and it was noble, argued that it was immoral to reward or punish people based on their skin color. Individuals ought to be judged solely by the choices they make. Anything less is bigotry. Liberals don't say that anymore. What happened?
So the New York Times printed this headline the other day. It read, "Can my children be friends with white people?" Talking about black children. And a lot of people were in outrage over this. A lot of people thought that this headline was racist. I asked that, what if the headlines were in reverse? What would people think? And so I printed out a fake headline that is in reverse that reads, "Can my children be friends with black people?" And I put Breitbart News at the top. Let's see what people think. And have you ever heard of a company called Breitbart News?
Yes.
They're like a conservative news station.
Definitely ever.
So they printed this headline, "Can my children be friends with black people?" Is that racist?
Can my children be friends with black people?
Can my children be friends with black people? Talking about their white children.
I mean, it sounds racist. Like, it totally sounds racist.
Can my children be friends with black people? Now, if someone asked you that, do you think that would be a racist question?
Yeah.
Can my children be friends with black people? Talking about their white kids. Does that sound racist to you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of Breitbart News?
No.
Okay. So they printed an article recently asking the question, can my children be friends with black people? Talking about their white kids. Okay. Does that question sound racist to you?
Yeah.
Except in reverse. Can my children be friends with white people? Talking about black kids. Is it still racist?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
From a black perspective or a white perspective, whoever asks, it's a racist question either way.
What if I told you this headline was fake, and that this is actually the real headline printed by the New York Times in reverse? Can my children be friends with white people? Is that still racist?
Not necessarily anymore, because the U.S. is, they're all white people. Racism never existed with white people necessarily, like in the U.S. with like slavery and everything. So I would definitely say that's not considered racist.
And this is the actual headline by the New York Times, except in reverse. Is it still racist?
Yeah. Yes.
So pretty interesting. So all of the black Americans that I interviewed said without a shadow of a doubt, without thinking about it, that either way, the headline of that article would be racist. It was only the white Americans, the white liberals, that have some sort of mythical white guilt embedded into them, where they think it would be racist one way but not racist the other way. This goes back to all the people that we interviewed about the Confederate monuments. Most of the black Americans that we interviewed about the monuments didn't even care that they were there. A lot of them said that they didn't even notice they were there. They didn't pay attention to them. It was only the white liberals that actually think that people think about these things on a daily basis, 24 hours a day. The question remains that if there was a conservative media outlet as large as the New York Times, as most widely known as the New York Times, and they did print the headline in reverse, I'm sure we would see much more outrage. Can my children...
We're talking about bullying before, but apparently the latest group who feels bullied are white people. 55% of them say they believe there is discrimination against white people in America. But when asked for specific examples, they couldn't quite say what they thought it was. So what do you think white people are worried about in terms of being discriminated against?
I'm very confused by it.
I'm not asking you.
What are you asking? The white girls.
I'm just wilding. Yeah. We happen to have three, so
group of people, and we were talking about this in the meeting, and it's more socioeconomic than race. But there is a group of people that are many white, unemployed people that I think they're tired of being told they have privilege when they're like, I can't feed my family, I can't do anything, which is just a distinction in poverty versus people with money. But the other time is I was trying to really dig deep and play the let me walk in the shoes of these statistics. Have I ever been discriminated against? One time I do feel it, and this is not in comparison to slavery or anything vast, but in my own life, one time the times I do discover it are when I try to chime in intellectually on like a movement, like let's say Black Lives Matter, and I'm saying in this instance, I think the messaging or the strategy of this is not the right move. If I just disagree on the slightest bit or chime in, people are like, you don't understand, you're white, and they excuse you intellectually, even though anyone that's white talking about those things can disclaim, I have never walked in these shoes, but I do have a brain and I'm an ally. I want to talk about it.
You're more disagreed with, and your opinions now don't count. It's not quite the same as discrimination.
Well, discrimination is just an unjust treatment based on a difference in race, age, sex. In that situation I'm describing, I am being discriminated. And I'm not saying that I feel the pain every day of this. I'm just saying I find it frustrating when I'm trying to join a conversation as an ally, and I can't critique anything because I'm white.
But I think Chris maybe
white folks will understand how we feel when people generalize about us.
An expert, obviously, on violence. Dr. King, who I think we both respect here, King's argument was that racism, his definition was this: racism equals prejudice plus power. Racism is defined as prejudice plus power. You didn't buy that argument? You didn't buy that definition? Because the point is, if racism equals prejudice plus power, black folk who are powerless by and large, who can be prejudiced but don't have the power to be racist.
That is one of the most idiotic things I've ever heard.
Calling King an idiot?
When Reginald Denny...
Are you calling King an idiot?
When Reginald Denny was on the ground and Damian Football Williams had a brick in his hand and was trying to kill him, did Reginald Denny face somebody who had power? I think so. What an absurd thing to say. You don't have power, therefore you can't be a bigot. When State Senator Diane Watts, Tavis, I can't account for Hamlin or for Armstrong. I can't speak for them.
But your airtime.
I can speak for me.
Right.
And here's what I try to do on my show. This obsession with racism diverts time, effort, and energy from real problems. And the biggest problem facing the black community, Tavis, is not racism. The biggest problem is children having children, and that is a product of the welfare state. Secondly, the problem of DWB, driving while black, is largely a function of the war on drugs. That's the reason there are so many interactions between blacks and the cops. We should call off the war on drugs. Blacks will benefit more than anybody else through the privatization of Social Security, something that Jesse Jackson and the Democratic Party oppose. So yes, I'm getting on some of these black leaders because I think they're doing a net disservice and taking time and energy away from problems that can be solved if we tone down the racism rhetoric.
Speaking of time and energy,
and suddenly there were 100,000 conservatives marching on Washington. Until that moment, you wouldn't find 3 conservatives marching down a street. They'd look at each other and say, what are we, collectivists?
Yeah, this is awkward, you know. But it's a constitutional thing, isn't it?
Things have changed, and then there's this whole younger generation, yourself included, of conservatives who are really aggressive fighters, and they're cleverer about it than I am. I'm kind of like a sledgehammer. But I love these people who put up this poster in Harvard Square saying it's okay to be white.
It's so great.
Incited. The left immediately reacts and they show their true colors. They're racist.
But this is wonderful. This started on 4chan, this thing, and then I leapt on this too. But it's a perfect example of saying something completely uncontroversial. Like, you don't need to hate yourself for what you were born
part of their thing. We're supposed to be inclusive, right? It just explodes that lie.
And it wasn't white pride. It wasn't white nationalism. It was, it's okay. It's the most milquetoast, lukewarm, imaginable endorsement. It's okay to be white. And it's in this lovely, elegant, thin font. You know, just like it is the most unthreatening, the most non-confrontational, imaginable statement, phrased and presented in the most uncontroversial and non-confrontational way possible, and they lost their minds.
Yes, of course.
It was beautiful. It was very beautiful.
Relenting stream of immigration. Non-stop. Non-stop. Folks like me who were Caucasian of European descent, for the first time in 2017, will be in an absolute minority in the United States of America. Absolute minority. Fewer than 50% of the people in America from then and on will be white European stock. That's not a bad thing. That's a source of our strength.